Hello, everyone. 47 words. That's all it took to shake the foundations of North America's economic landscape. Early in the morning, precisely at 9:03 a.m. Eastern Time, Donald Trump opened Truth Social and released a message that hit like a political grenade. It wasn't a tariff, it wasn't a negotiation, it wasn't even a warning, it was a ban. In that single post, the sitting President of the United States declared the complete suspension of all non-essential trade and travel between the United States and Canada, America's largest trading partner. Just like that, no congressional vote, no formal announcement, no diplomatic channel, just 47 words and a ticking 72-hour clock that set the entire continent on edge. To comprehend the scale of this move, consider this. The United States and Canada exchange roughly $2 billion in commerce every single day. Almost 9 million American jobs depend on this relationship, either directly or indirectly. For over 70 years, through world wars, the Cold War, financial crises, and even a global pandemic, this economic partnership never faltered, not once. And suddenly, one social media post threatened to shut it down in just 3 days. What made jaws drop across Washington, Ottawa, and financial centers worldwide wasn't just the declaration, it was the fact that the post cited no law, no national emergency, no statutory authority, no consultation with Congress, no briefing of the Senate Finance Committee, no communication with the Canadian Embassy. In short, the largest bilateral trade relationship on the planet was supposedly being frozen by a tweet, a message with the same legal standing as someone bragging about a golf score. What happened next transformed this headline-grabbing moment into a historic international standoff. At the precise moment the tweet went live, Canada's Prime Minister, Mark Carney, was standing at a podium in Ottawa, speaking live on international television. Cameras rolled, reporters leaned in, and within seconds, someone in the room read Trump's post aloud. Carney had roughly 4 seconds to process the unprecedented message. The President of the United States had just banned Canada through a social media post. The room froze. Journalists glanced down at their phones, then back up. The broadcast didn't pause. There were no whispers, no aides nudging him, no chance to prepare a careful diplomatic statement. Carney didn't panic. He didn't fumble. He didn't even glance at his notes. Instead, he took a measured breath, looked directly into the cameras that were broadcasting to millions across the globe, and spoke in the tone of a seasoned central banker, the kind of calm, precise voice honed by decades of navigating financial crises without letting emotion take control. "I've seen it," he began. And then he delivered the line that would echo across global markets within minutes. "A tweet is not a law." That one sentence, cold and deliberate, dismantled the authority of the post instantly. Carney went on to explain that a social media post does not constitute a legal instrument under American domestic law, international treaty law, or the regulations of the World Trade Organization. Canada, he clarified, would respond only to a formal legal communication delivered through proper diplomatic channels. If the United States issued a legitimate legal instrument, Canada would respond formally. If it remained a tweet, Canada would simply note it and continue governing as usual. The message was unmistakable. Canada was not panicking. Canada was not scrambling. Canada was not even treating the ban as real. When a journalist asked whether this meant Canada was essentially ignoring the President of the United States, Carney calmly replied that Canada applies the same standard to every sovereign government. A communication with legal authority receives a legal response. A social media statement without legal standing gets noted, nothing more. In that moment, live on international television, the Prime Minister of a G7 nation publicly framed the President's announcement as noise, something for markets, lawyers, and diplomats to dissect, not enforce. The global financial reaction was immediate. Within 40 minutes of the exchange, the US dollar fell nearly 1.3% against a basket of major currencies. Gold surged as investors sought safety. Treasury yields shifted as traders processed what they had just witnessed. A presidential declaration of enormous economic consequences met by a calm, rational rebuttal from a neighboring prime minister asserting legal reality. Professional traders don't wait for cable news panels to debate meaning. They react to signals. On that morning, 2 signals hit simultaneously. A tweet claiming to ban the largest bilateral trade relationship in the world, and a measured response explaining that such a ban had no legal standing unless issued through proper channels. Markets immediately priced the gap between the two realities. The response didn't stop there. Within 40 minutes, finance ministers from Germany, France, and Japan had already called Ottawa. The message was consistent. Canada had the legal high ground. In Europe, the British Foreign Secretary issued a statement reaffirming the United Kingdom's commitment to a rules-based global trading order. The European Union's Trade Commissioner organised emergency calls with Japan, South Korea, Australia, and New Zealand. These were not adversarial countries. These were America's closest allies, suddenly coordinating on how to respond to Washington. Behind the scenes, American legal experts noted something explosive. Under U.S. constitutional law, a tweet even from the president has no legal effect. It is not an executive order. It is not a proclamation. It is not a national emergency declaration. Without such mechanisms, a trade ban of the magnitude described cannot exist. Then, 2 hours later, Trump fired back with another post on Truth Social, directly attacking Carney. The president called the Canadian Prime Minister a smug globalist puppet, insisted the ban was legal, and warned additional measures could arrive within 48 hours. Lawyers immediately noticed the glaring problem. Like the first post, the second cited no statute, no emergency declaration, no executive order, nothing that would make it legally enforceable. Financial markets noted this as well. After the second post, the dollar weakened another fraction. Gold ticked up again. Traders no longer treated the posts as policy. They were political signals creating uncertainty, not enforceable law. The 72-hour countdown now became a test not just of trade policy, but of presidential power. If the administration issued a formal executive order, courts would immediately challenge it. Declaring Canada, a NATO ally and the United States' closest trading partner, a national security threat would trigger lawsuits within hours, likely producing an injunction before the policy could even take effect. If the clock expired without action, the world would witness what Carney had explained on live television. A tweet alone does not change international law, treaties, or the global economy. And here's the key detail that made Ottawa's response so powerful. This confrontation hadn't started that morning. Canada had been preparing for months. The auto tariffs, threats to wheat exports, energy tariffs all had been met with carefully measured responses. Canada redirected supply to other markets, accelerated energy independence, signed deals with European buyers. Every escalation from Washington was met with a faster, legally precise, internationally coordinated response. By the time the tweet arrived, Canada had built a legal record, already moving through USMCA dispute panels. The 72-hour clock wasn't just a timer, it was a global stage, highlighting the difference between political declarations and legal reality. Financial markets understood it. Allied governments understood it. Governments worldwide took careful notes. Once the world sees the line between a tweet and actual law, that knowledge doesn't disappear. Carney's response demonstrated that the most powerful argument in international trade isn't the one shouted the loudest, it's the one proven with numbers, precedent, and legal authority. 47 words sparked chaos. One calm, precise rebuttal framed the truth, reshaping not just North American politics, but global economic awareness. By the time the 72-hour clock ticked down, Washington realized something crucial. The tweet had no teeth, no legal authority, no enforceable mandate. Canada had not just ignored it, they had turned it into a global demonstration of what rule-based diplomacy looks like when paired with preparation and composure. Mark Carney didn't just defend Canadian sovereignty, he reframed the narrative entirely. He shifted the focus from impulsive declarations to verifiable facts, from threats to lawful process, and from rhetoric to accountability. Every ally, every investor, every legal observer around the world saw the same message. Social media is not policy, and tweets do not override treaties. By then, markets had fully internalized the reality. The initial shock that had sent the US dollar and treasury yields fluctuating began to stabilize. Gold held its gains, not because panic was gone, but because the world now had clarity. The uncertainty that had erupted across Wall Street, Ottawa, Tokyo, London, and Frankfurt began to resolve around a single point. Canada's calm, lawful, and fact-based approach had effectively neutralized the unilateral claims of the world's most powerful trading nation. It was a rare instance where law, strategy, and preparation outmaneuvered political bravado without a single shot fired, a single executive order, or a single new tariff imposed. Meanwhile, within Washington, the internal reckoning had already begun. Advisors, legal experts, and even members of Congress understood that a unilateral move of this magnitude, if attempted formally, would invite immediate judicial intervention. The courts were clear. The president cannot unilaterally suspend trade with a close ally through social media. And so, the messaging from Ottawa not only preserved Canadian interests, but sent a subtle warning to the White House. The global community sees the difference between noise and law, and repeated violations of that principle carry consequences beyond bilateral irritation. The international community didn't just watch, it took note. Germany, Japan, the United Kingdom, South Korea, Australia, and the EU all recognized that the legal and procedural high ground lies with Canada. The moment demonstrated a critical lesson in global politics. Preparation, composure, and adherence to lawful channels outweigh impulsive declarations, no matter who utters them. For every nation watching, for every CEO monitoring risk, and for every diplomat calculating leverage, the story was now clear. Sovereignty, lawful process, and data-driven argumentation carry weight. Tweets, on the other hand, carry headlines but little else. As the dust settled, analysts began cataloguing the broader implications. The episode was about more than dairy, trade, or tweets. It was about the fundamental tension between political impulse and institutional authority. It revealed the fragility of decisions made for optics rather than law. It highlighted the power of preparation and composure in global diplomacy. And most importantly, it set a precedent. A G7 nation had stood firm, responded with facts, and illustrated that the credibility of international relations depends not on who shouts the loudest, but who acts with legitimacy, foresight, and reason. Back in Ottawa, Carney's statement would later be dissected in law schools, business schools, and international policy forums. It became a textbook example of how to respond to overreach without escalation, how to maintain dignity while defending national interest, and how to turn a moment of potential chaos into a demonstration of disciplined leadership. For Canadian farmers, exporters, and industries dependent on U.S. trade, the victory was tangible. Markets stabilized, trade flows remained uninterrupted, and the sovereignty of Canadian policy had been publicly reaffirmed. Meanwhile, the United States faced an uncomfortable reality. The president's words had been powerless without legal instruments. Domestic observers, allies, and adversaries alike now had a visible benchmark for the limits of unilateral executive power in trade. The 72-hour clock didn't just expire, it ticked loudly in the ears of policymakers worldwide, reminding them that law, process, and evidence-based decision-making still govern the global economic order, regardless of social media theatrics. In the end, the episode demonstrated a profound truth about leadership, law, and international relations. Speed, attention, and bold declarations can capture headlines, but only preparation, facts, and adherence to established channels command respect, stability, and long-term influence. The lesson was clear. Global markets, sovereign nations, and political institutions reward precision over panic, evidence over emotion, and lawful authority over empty threats. 47 words nearly shook the world. One measured response preserved it, and changed how the world perceives leadership in a hyper-connected, instantaneous political environment. As the sun set on that extraordinary day, Canada's stance was clear. Washington's tweets had faded into headlines, and the financial, legal, and political communities had all learned a lesson they wouldn't forget. The story wasn't just about trade. It was about how the world now measures power, not by noise, but by the weight of law, the clarity of facts, and the courage to stand firm when the world is watching. And in that respect, Mark Carney, the Canadian government, and a meticulously prepared nation had achieved something historic. They had shown that in an era dominated by impulsive communication, restraint, preparation, and legal precision remain the ultimate instruments of influence.